the letter that changed everything. A stranger rarely expects destiny to arrive inside an ordinary envelope, yet that was exactly how everything began. The cream-colored letter waited among unpaid bills and advertisements, carrying the heavy seal of an unfamiliar law office. He almost ignored it. Instead, curiosity won. Inside, a formal notice declared that he was the sole heir to Blackwood Library, inherited from a man named Elias Thorne. The name meant absolutely nothing to him, but the document insisted there had been no mistake. Confused and skeptical, he asked neighbors whether they had ever heard of either the man or the library. Friendly conversations stopped mid-sentence. Smiles disappeared. One elderly woman quietly crossed herself before walking away without another word. Another neighbor simply whispered, "Don't go," then hurried inside, locking the door behind him. Questions multiplied faster than answers. Days later, the stranger followed winding country roads toward the isolated town mentioned in the documents. Autumn mist drifted between towering trees, swallowing distant hills and muffling every sound except the steady rumble of his aging car. At the end of a forgotten lane stood Blackwood Library. The building looked less abandoned than forgotten by time itself. Stone walls disappeared beneath thick ivy. Cracked windows reflected gray skies like unblinking eyes. Dust coated every step leading toward towering oak doors, while twisted iron fences groaned softly whenever the wind stirred them. The silence felt unnatural, almost watchful, as though every forgotten book inside already knew his name. Before he reached the entrance, an elderly caretaker emerged from the shadows carrying an old lantern despite the afternoon light. His tired eyes studied the stranger for a long moment before handing him a heavy brass key. "It belongs to you now," he said quietly. Then his expression hardened. "Whatever happens, don't open the locked reading room." Without another explanation, the caretaker walked away. Alone before the entrance, the stranger unlocked the front doors and stepped inside. At the far end of the endless hallway stood an enormous iron door, wrapped in black chains and secured by a centuries-old lock unlike anything he had ever seen. It seemed to breathe beneath gathering shadows. A library everyone pretends doesn't exist. The next morning, he wandered through Blackwood Library in stunned silence. Every hallway opened into another vast chamber, each lined with towering shelves that stretched toward shadowed ceilings. Thousands of rare books stood perfectly arranged, their leather bindings untouched by dust despite decades of abandonment. It felt impossible. Nothing suggested neglect except the silence itself. Portraits of stern librarians hung between towering bookcases, their painted eyes seeming to follow every cautious step. Brass nameplates beneath each frame carried dates spanning centuries. Yet entire stretches of shelving stood strangely empty, as though hundreds of volumes had been carefully removed rather than stolen. The gaps looked deliberate, preserved instead of repaired. Hoping for answers, he visited nearby shops and cafes. The reactions were unsettling. One shopkeeper insisted the library had burned down many years ago. Another laughed nervously and claimed no library had ever existed in the town. An elderly baker abruptly changed the subject before refusing to speak another word. Every story contradicted the last, leaving him more confused than before. As evening settled over Blackwood, rain tapped gently against the stained glass windows. He continued exploring, carrying only a flashlight and the heavy brass key the caretaker had given him. The library creaked softly, old timber sighing beneath unseen pressures. Then his light settled upon the dusty marble floor. A single trail of footprints crossed the entrance hall. The prints looked fresh, their edges sharp and undisturbed. They could not have been his. They led deeper into the darkness, toward corridors he had not yet explored. He listened carefully. Somewhere beyond the endless shelves, a floorboard groaned beneath the unmistakable weight of another person. His pulse quickened as the mysterious footprints disappeared around a corner, silently inviting him to follow into whatever waited beyond the darkness. The first hidden clues. Morning sunlight filtered through stained glass, painting faded colors across the library floor as the stranger began repairing a damaged bookshelf near the eastern wing. Most of the wood had warped with age, and one loose support beam refused to stay in place. Frustrated, he leaned his shoulder against the shelf with unexpected force. A sharp click echoed through the silent room. The entire bookcase shifted several inches. Behind it, hidden inside the stone wall, rested a narrow compartment untouched by time. His hands trembled as he reached inside and carefully lifted out its contents. There were weathered handwritten journals tied with brittle leather straps, folded maps covered in mysterious coded markings, carefully drawn family trees connecting names that still appeared throughout the town, yellowed newspaper clippings describing disappearances and unexplained deaths, and several ancient books bearing strange symbols inked into their margins. Every discovery seemed connected, yet none offered a complete answer. He opened the oldest journal and turned its fragile pages with growing anticipation. Again and again, one phrase appeared in different handwriting across different decades. The Truth Room. Each mention hinted that it contained something capable of changing everything people believed about Blackwood. But whenever the journals reached the point where the room should have been described, the pages had been cleanly removed. Someone had deliberately erased the most important part of every record. That afternoon, another mystery arrived. Waiting on the front desk was a plain envelope with no name, no address, and no explanation. Inside lay a thick stack of cash, enough money to change almost anyone's life, accompanied by a single typed sentence. Sell the library immediately. Ask no questions. He searched outside, but whoever had delivered it had vanished without a trace. Standing alone among shelves filled with forgotten knowledge, he stared at the money, then at the hidden journals in his hands. If Blackwood Library was truly worthless, why would someone pay so much to make sure he walked away before discovering its greatest secret? The town starts fighting back. The stranger refused the anonymous money and locked the hidden journals inside an old wooden cabinet, convinced they held answers someone desperately wanted erased. From that moment, the atmosphere around him changed. Smiles became forced, conversations ended as he approached, and every curious glance carried the weight of an unspoken warning. Respected members of the town soon began visiting the library one by one. A councilman praised his enthusiasm before gently suggesting the building was nothing more than an expensive burden. A wealthy businessman offered to purchase the property for far more than it was worth. Even the local minister advised him that some places were better left untouched for everyone's peace. Their words sounded courteous, but each conversation ended with the same quiet expectation that he would leave. When kindness failed, something darker replaced it. The historical documents he had requested from the town archive suddenly became unavailable. By the time he arrived, the building had been closed without explanation, its doors chained and notices claiming emergency maintenance. Employees who had promised to help now insisted they had never spoken to him. Returning to his hotel that evening, he froze in the doorway. Every drawer had been opened. His suitcase lay overturned across the floor. Papers were scattered everywhere, yet nothing valuable had been stolen. Whoever entered had been searching for something very specific. The following morning brought another message. Several tall windows at Blackwood Library had been shattered during the night. Jagged glass covered the stone floor like frozen rain, while the hidden compartment behind the bookshelf remained untouched, almost as if the intruders had wanted him to know they could return whenever they pleased. Later that afternoon, the town's respected judge requested a private meeting. His voice remained calm, almost sympathetic, as he looked directly into the stranger's eyes. Some stories should remain buried. The warning carried no anger, only certainty. Walking back through the quiet streets, the stranger finally understood. This was no collection of isolated incidents. Powerful people were working together, determined to protect whatever truth Blackwood Library had guarded for generations. Opening the forbidden room. By sunrise, every clue had fallen into place. The coded passages hidden across dozens of forgotten books formed a single sequence of numbers, symbols, and quotations that could only point to one conclusion. The stranger stood before the massive iron door at the end of the hallway, its black chains cold beneath his trembling hands. The brass key slid into the ancient lock, but it refused to turn. Remembering the final line from Elias Thorne's journal, he pressed a small engraved symbol beside the keyhole. A deep metallic click echoed through the silent library. Slowly, the centuries-old mechanism surrendered. The heavy door groaned open. A breath of cool, untouched air escaped from the darkness, carrying the unmistakable scent of old parchment, polished oak, and fading candle wax. It was as though the room had been waiting patiently for someone worthy enough to enter. Nothing inside had been disturbed. Elegant reading tables remained perfectly arranged beneath crystal chandeliers coated with delicate webs. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes unlike any he had seen elsewhere in the library. Every spine was blank. No catalog numbers. No titles. No official records. It was an entire collection that history had chosen to forget. At the very center of the room rested a single wooden pedestal beneath a circle of stained glass. Upon it lay one handwritten manuscript protected inside a simple glass case. Across its cover, written in bold black ink, were 4 chilling words. The Founder's Testament. He carefully lifted the fragile pages and began to read. The opening paragraph shattered everything the town claimed about its origins. The celebrated founders, praised for bringing prosperity and justice, had built neither. Instead, they had arrived with forged legal documents, claiming land that belonged to innocent farming families who could neither read nor defend themselves. Those who resisted were branded criminals, imprisoned under fabricated charges, or forced to disappear without explanation. As the manuscript continued, each confession became darker than the last. Official records had been rewritten. Witnesses had been silenced. Newspaper editors had accepted bribes to publish heroic stories while burying reports of violence. Entire generations grew up believing carefully manufactured legends, never realizing the truth had been locked away only a few streets from their homes. The stranger lowered the manuscript, unable to steady his breathing. Outside those library walls stood statues honoring men history called heroes. Inside this room, those same men had confessed to becoming thieves, liars, and architects of a deception so complete that an entire town had spent generations celebrating the very people who had stolen its soul. The greatest forbidden secret. With shaking hands, the stranger turned the next page of the Founder's Testament, expecting more confessions of greed and betrayal. Instead, the manuscript revealed something even more astonishing. The founders had not built Blackwood Library merely as a place to collect books. Hidden beneath its noble purpose was another mission entirely. The library had been designed as a living vault, a sanctuary where the original truth could survive even if every public record was altered. They believed that lies could rule for generations, but somewhere, somehow, the evidence had to remain alive until someone possessed the courage to uncover it. The manuscript explained that guilt had divided the founders themselves. While some devoted their lives to protecting the false history they had created, a few were consumed by remorse. Unable to undo the damage without destroying the town they had built, they created a secret covenant. One trusted librarian would be chosen in every generation, not to preserve stories, but to preserve the truth hidden beneath them. Each guardian accepted the role, knowing it carried a terrible cost. Several disappeared without explanation after coming too close to exposing the evidence. Others died in accidents that no longer seemed accidental. A few simply vanished from official records altogether, their names erased as carefully as the crimes they had sworn to protect. Yet before each guardian fell, another quietly inherited the responsibility, ensuring the chain remained unbroken. Then came the final pages written by Elias Thorne himself. He confessed that the covenant had reached its breaking point. The powerful families had grown too influential, too connected, and too determined to erase the remaining evidence forever. Every local candidate had become vulnerable to pressure, loyalty, fear, or blood ties. Choosing another resident would only guarantee the truth disappeared forever. That was why he searched beyond the town. He spent years tracing distant family records until he found someone with no connection to Blackwood's history. Someone whose conscience belonged to no powerful name. The stranger. At that moment, the inheritance transformed before his eyes. Blackwood Library had never been his reward. It was his burden. The keys, the journals, the hidden archive, and the forbidden room had all been preparing him for one unavoidable task. He had inherited no fortune. He had inherited responsibility. And for the first time, he understood that the greatest forbidden secret was never hidden to protect the guilty. It had been preserved so that, one day, the innocent would finally have someone willing to speak for them. The town divides. The stranger understood that keeping the evidence hidden any longer would only repeat the mistakes of those who came before him. Before anyone could seize the manuscript or burn the library to the ground, he worked through the night, carefully copying every journal, ledger, letter, and page of the founder's testament. Digital copies were sent to historians, journalists, universities, and legal authorities across the country. By sunrise, the truth no longer existed in only one place. It had become impossible to erase. The reaction was immediate. Blackwood awoke to cameras lining its quiet streets and reporters gathering outside the library's iron gates. Neighbors who had spent their lives avoiding uncomfortable questions suddenly found themselves forced to answer them. Some stood outside the town hall demanding criminal investigations and full public disclosure. Others insisted the documents were elaborate forgeries created to destroy Blackwood's reputation. Families who had once shared holiday dinners stopped speaking to one another. Old friendships collapsed beneath arguments that had been buried for generations. Every conversation carried the same impossible question. What if everything they had been taught was a lie? Authorities quickly opened investigations into land records, financial transactions, and historical archives that had remained untouched for decades. Several of the town's most influential families hired lawyers, publicly denied every accusation, and blamed the stranger for dividing the community. Yet the evidence continued to grow stronger with every passing day. The statues honoring the founders became gathering places for protesters and descendants of forgotten victims. Flowers were placed beneath newly discovered family names, while handwritten notes thanked those who had refused to let the truth disappear forever. Faces erased from history finally received recognition, their stories spoken aloud after generations of silence. At the heart of it all stood Blackwood Library. Once dismissed as an abandoned relic, it became the center of national attention. Scholars, archivists, and historians arrived from across the country, determined to preserve every surviving document before time or fear could claim them again. The building that had spent decades hidden in silence had finally become the loudest voice in the nation, and no amount of power could force it back into the shadows. Justice written in ink. The weeks that followed transformed Blackwood in ways no one could have imagined. Courtrooms filled with historians, legal scholars, and descendants carrying faded photographs instead of wealth. Judges examined evidence preserved for generations inside the library, while investigators traced forgotten bank accounts, hidden trusts, and land transfers concealed beneath layers of fabricated records. Piece by piece, fortunes built upon deception began to unravel. Although time had made complete justice impossible, the law reached as far as it could. Properties proven to have been taken through fraud were returned whenever rightful ownership could still be established. Compensation funds were created for families whose homes and livelihoods had been stolen beyond recovery. Public officials who had protected the lies offered formal apologies, acknowledging that silence had prolonged wounds passed from one generation to the next. One ceremony stood above all the rest. In the town square, where statues had once celebrated only the founders, new memorials were unveiled bearing the names of the forgotten families erased from official history. Children watched as descendants placed flowers beneath names they had waited lifetimes to see recognized. Tears flowed freely, not because the past could be changed, but because it could finally be remembered honestly. Many expected the stranger to seek revenge against those who had threatened him. Instead, he refused every invitation to become a symbol of bitterness. He insisted the library should never become another place where one version of history silenced another. Its purpose was preservation. The forbidden books were carefully restored, cataloged, and opened to the public alongside every supporting journal, letter, and record. Nothing was hidden behind locked doors anymore. Visitors could examine the evidence themselves and draw their own conclusions, just as Elias Thorne had always hoped. As the reading rooms filled with students, researchers, and ordinary families, one truth became impossible to ignore. Power had protected deception for generations. But knowledge, once shared freely, proved stronger than secrecy. Ink had outlasted fear, and the truth no longer belonged to a single guardian. It belonged to everyone willing to read it. The greatest inheritance. Months passed, and with them came a quiet transformation that no one in Blackwood could have imagined when the stranger first arrived. Scaffolding disappeared from the weathered stone walls, broken windows gave way to gleaming glass, and ivy was carefully trimmed rather than torn away, allowing the old library to wear its age with dignity instead of decay. The silence that had once haunted its halls was replaced by something far more powerful: life. Each morning, children hurried through the restored entrance, carrying notebooks beneath their arms, their laughter echoing between shelves that had stood lonely for generations. Students sat beside retired teachers, historians shared tables with curious travelers, and families wandered through exhibitions telling stories that had once been forbidden. Every page turned inside Blackwood Library became another quiet victory over the darkness that had nearly erased it. The great iron door at the end of the hallway no longer stood wrapped in chains. The locked reading room remained exactly where it had always been, but now its doors stayed open. Visitors entered respectfully, reading the preserved manuscripts, studying the evidence, and understanding how easily history could be manipulated when only the powerful controlled the story. Fear had surrendered its place to remembrance. Late one afternoon, as golden sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, the stranger stood alone inside the once forbidden chamber. His eyes settled upon Elias Thorne's final letter, displayed beneath protective glass for everyone to read. One sentence had never left his heart: truth doesn't belong to those who discover it. It belongs to those willing to protect it. Only now did he fully understand those words. He had never been the hero of this story. He had simply become the next guardian who chose to pass the truth forward instead of locking it away again. As evening approached, the last visitors quietly departed, leaving only the gentle rustle of turning pages and the warm glow of fading sunlight across polished wooden floors. The camera slowly drifted backward through endless shelves filled with knowledge once condemned to disappear, past smiling readers, restored portraits, and the open entrance welcoming anyone seeking understanding. Outside, the library stood proudly beneath a sky painted with the colors of sunset. Fortunes may vanish, buildings may crumble, reputations may rise and fall, but truth, patiently preserved and courageously shared, possesses a remarkable endurance that no deception can conquer forever. The stranger smiled one final time before walking into the gathering twilight, leaving Blackwood Library alive once more. In the end, the greatest inheritance had never been the building, the books, or the hidden chamber. It had always been the courage to unlock the truth.